Hey y'all, I'm Shauna. Welcome in or welcome back to a new video. Today's video is very fun and it's going to be information packed. So today I'm going to be sharing my top 10 takes of the year. These are like my best opinions, my best advice, my best takes. I've made over 100 videos this year, and so I am taking the best of the best nuggets of info and advice, and I'm going to be sharing them with you today. So strap in, it's going to be awesome. And all of the corresponding videos are going to be linked in the description, so you can go and check and watch the full video. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we're going to move on and talk about identity formation. We tie our identities to our stuff. I feel like everybody does it, or it's so incredibly common that most people do it. It's kind of like saying you are what you buy. Or even like we see this on TikTok, if you want to be this thing, or if you want to be a part of this subgenre, this is what you buy. If you want to be a clean girl, this is what you buy. And so it's kind of like purchasing your way into a new identity. And so our stuff does become a part of who we are and our identity, especially in the name of like self-expression, right? Like you're expressing who you are through your stuff. Therefore, your stuff is an extension of you. We can feel more confident, secure, or valued based on the stuff that we own. We can also feel this way if our identities are validated by other people. Right? Like I'm buying all of these, I don't know, like Sarah J. Maas books. Therefore, I'm like a real fantasy romantasy reader, right? And you can feel secure in that through buying all of this stuff. And maybe reading is part of your identity as well. Being part of certain communities can feel like they require certain types of consumption too. Or maybe you might not require it, but it can feel like this is what you're supposed to buy when you belong here. You just might not think twice. Like you see makeup wearers acting a certain way, like let's say buying all the new releases. This is just how the community acts, and so you do that too. And the identity of belonging to the community can maybe outweigh some of the other thoughts that you might be having, or maybe you just don't think twice because this is what people in the community do. This gets deeper when we think about symbolic self-completion theory. Here's what it argues. People seek to acquire and display symbols that are strongly related to what they perceive as the ideal self. This is especially the case when our sense of self is threatened. TikTok's obsession with defining ourselves into microgenres is this exact thing. And we've really come to associate stuff with our identities. And so our stuff becomes incredibly important. And buying new stuff, having our stuff completely aligned with our identity becomes super important too. Any moment our identity shifts, we can feel like we need to buy new stuff in order to match that shift. But also, when our identity shifts, if we don't really know, like we could say, oh, this doesn't fit me anymore. But we can feel this real sense of loss or confusion of like, well, if this isn't it, what is it? Like, who am I now? And buying new things when our identity is shifting becomes so incredibly important. And so we could go onto something like TikTok to be like, okay, what is it now? If this doesn't fit, then like what does fit? Or maybe you stumble across some new kind of, I don't know, identity or like subgenre while you're scrolling through TikTok or YouTube. And then you realize, oh my gosh, that is me. This can apply to so many facets of our lives. Like the hobbies that we have, from makeup to crocheting to reading, maybe sports that we play. Braun and Wickland argue that there is a compensatory relationship between a person's security and certain kinds of conspicuous consumption, but that these relations cannot exist without individuals' perceived incompleteness and commitment to the identity in question. Personal identity can become intertwined with consumer culture, emphasizing individualism through the acquisition of unique products or experiences that differentiate one's identity from others. Lastly, individuals' tendency to externalize their concerns about their lives by acquiring simple objects that reinforce and improve their self-definitions. In terms of goods/objects as individual status symbols, greater emphasis is placed on tangible material objects as they can be recognized and understood as status symbols by a wider audience that are intangible and abstract ideas. This last quote really talks about like this doubling down. When you have a problem in your life, people can go to stuff in order to like fix it. First and foremost, that stuff can't fix our problems. We've also kind of been taught that like you can buy your way into solving your problems. You can buy your way into a new identity or even happiness. You are playing the long game. One of the mistakes I see people make when they want to change their habits, or most specifically when they want to go on a no-buy, is that they opt for a solution that they can do right now. A no-buy is a solution that is easily accessible, and it's kind of one of the like go-to solutions when you have a shopping problem. Might even be like the only really concrete, clear solution that is like easily accessible. You go on YouTube and you say, how do I change my shopping habits, or how do I stop buying stuff? You see no-buy, and it's also very actionable. There's lots of videos on it. It's very actionable, so you can go on one tomorrow. Like you can see a video today, you can say, you know what, tomorrow I'm going to go on my no-buy. Having a solution, even if you haven't taken a step towards that solution, just having one can be a mental ease. Like you know what you're supposed to do. It's the having the plan and knowing what to do that can provide great comfort. But opting for the first solution that we see, or the easiest solution we see, or the most right now solution can be short-sighted because it prioritizes immediacy versus effectiveness. Your goal isn't to come up with the quickest solution. Your goal is to change how you shop, how you relate to your money, how you spend. The most effective solution is going to be the one that will give you the long-term results, something that you can take with you for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. I mean, I don't want to say forever, because sometimes, new information, new ways of doing, they come about and, we can change and iterate, but something that is a long-term solution. In other words, you're playing the long game. It doesn't really matter if you could change your shopping habits really well for the next year. What really matters is to find something that you can take with you through life. What you can do right now might not be that thing that works long-term. And so the mindset shift here is prioritizing the long-term, but also, taking time to think about your choices and not stepping into anything impulsively. You take time to slow step things. You take time to cultivate. A person who gets on a no-buy right now might have really great results for a year, but then on year 2 and 3, they slip back, or their success, maybe they weren't shopping like they were, but they also weren't shopping at their peak or at their best. And maybe they yo-yo with their spending habits for the next 10 years. Whereas another person who might have mediocre results for the first 2 to 3 years builds something consistent for the next 15. I'm not saying a no-buy is inherently one category over the other. A no-buy has provided so many people with such success. All I'm saying is to think about the long game. What for you is going to be the solution to provide you with long-term results? If you're making progress, basically any progress, that is something to celebrate. Because even if you are 10% better than you were 6 months ago, we can frame it as, oh, I'm not 50% better, I'm not 100% better, but you're 10% ahead of where you were 6 months ago. You could be shopping and spending in the exact same ways, but the truth is you're not. You've saved some money along the way. You've noticed something about yourself, something about your triggers, your spending habits. You've literally done something. And that means you're literally not in the same place as you were. Change doesn't happen overnight in the majority of instances. You don't wake up one day and your spending is just 100% in the way that you want. With most things in life, including habit change, you achieve changes incrementally. You get to step 100 through steps 1 through 99. You need to make each step in order to get to the end goal. Change happens as progress and not as perfection. And for folks who might be on a no-buy, this view is especially strong. I don't buy for 365 days or I'm a failure. But if you are not buying more days than you are buying, then you're doing it. Like, you're also changing your habits and you're also changing the way you spend and saving money. Was the goal really to be perfect, or was the goal to change? And I feel like we can get lost in that shuffle. And that's also one of the reasons why we don't get to celebrate ourselves in the way that we would want. So now let's talk about, where do you go from here? I have 3 suggestions for you. And my number 1 is to keep going, don't start over. Now, if you're somebody who is saying, you know what, I actually think that continuing with my no-buy is the right call for me. If you want to ultimately keep going with the no-buy, I urge you to not day zero it and to not start over, but to continue. If your no-buy started on, let's say, January 1st, you're not resetting the clock to, let's say, February 15th as your new day 1. When you reset the clock, it signals to your brain that you've failed and that you potentially consider yourself a failure. Now, I found this great article from Forbes, and it will be linked, and I want to share it with you. And I think this really sums up why I'm against the don't day zero it. When animals, be them tadpole or human, when it's something, their brains release testosterone and dopamine. With time and repetition, this signal morphs the brain structure and chemical configuration to make successful animals smarter, better trained, more confident, and more likely to succeed in the future. Biologists call this the winner effect. The not yet named loser effect is equally cyclical. In one study, monkeys who made a mistake in a trial, even after mastering the task on par with other monkeys, later performed worse than monkeys who made no mistakes. In other words, they were thrown off by mistakes instead of learning from them. Some research similarly suggests that failure can impede concentration, thereby sabotaging future performance. Students arbitrarily told they failed compared to their peers later displayed worse reading comprehension. When we fail once, we're more likely to fail again and at the same goal, and sometimes more catastrophically. In one study, dieters fed pizza and convinced they'd ruined their daily diet goal, ate 50% more cookies immediately afterwards than those not on diets at all. Now, this article is, what they're getting at is, when you fail at something, it can get into your head psychologically and affect your performance down the road. But also, when we day zero something, I think that is a bit of a punishment, and it really feels like a way to kind of ruminate or dwell on a mistake. Constant curation. This would be the desire for aspects of our life, be it the way our home looks, our wardrobes, or our beauty routines, to be its perfect iteration. So we're constantly looking for room to improve and ways for our category, our wardrobe as an example, to be perfect. So here are a couple comments from Reddit to illustrate my point. I don't have a ton of clothes because I'm constantly curating. In other words, I binge and buy $500 worth of clothing and then need to purge items that are less perfect. I have a minimal wardrobe, but I've wasted tons of money trying to get it that way. I'll buy items that are nearly identical to what I already have because it's like I'm looking for the perfect item. And there's always something not exactly perfect. I have a constant sense of unease, and I think I project that onto my clothing because it's something I can easily control. Another Redditor responded saying, personally, I have trouble deciding what clothes to buy out of being worried about making the wrong decisions and wasting money on something that you don't end up being happy with. And this happens all the time. I think that it happens with wardrobe the most, but it's certainly not the only area. And as we evolve as people, as our style evolves and changes, we can view our wardrobe as not or unreflective of us, unreflective of the way we want to look or be perceived in the world. So it needs to be updated. And so we can constantly be curating to get our lives or our wardrobe in a way that is just so. And if our wardrobe isn't reflective of us, then it needs to be changed. It needs to be updated. And my wardrobe could be cuter, it could be more minimalist, or it could be more stylish. The quest for that is really the quest for the perfect wardrobe. And because we haven't defined what cuteness means or stylish means, we could always be more of that thing. And there is something to be said of having our wardrobes or our homes or our beauty routines be reflective of ourselves. But I do think that there becomes a point where it can become harmful and can affect our self-esteem. Because if we are never satisfied, then we can't learn to self-accept and to be satisfied. It's kind of like always looking for the newer, nicer thing. In this case, it's always looking for the perfect wardrobe or the perfect thing or the most self-reflective thing. And if you change just an ounce, then those things have to change too. So let's now dive a little bit deeper into bad habits. Most of our daily actions are not out of conscious choice. Or intention, I should say. Most of our daily actions are impulses or routines, and they don't come about through a specific thought or intention. Like when you have to go to the bathroom, often you just go because you know you need to go. You're not having this internal dialogue. I'm going to give you a quote here, and I feel like it just needs a little bit of explaining. A lot of the habits that lead people into depression aren't going to lead them out. This same is true for other things like gambling or shopping, getting into debt, etc., etc. Right off the bat here, this is the reason why I think that not talking about habits are a disservice. It's like that common expression where it's like you're doing the same things over, but you're expecting different results. We can't do the same things that we've been doing. And by that, I mean in the way we've been shopping and consuming, because those are the habits that led us to the problem. So we have to change up our habits if we want to have different results. So if bad habits aren't helpful, like bad shopping habits, why do we do them? The place they come from, the striatum, isn't rational and doesn't distinguish between good and bad habits. And it doesn't know or care about long-term consequences. So we do bad habits because they're easier, as I was mentioning at the top of the video. And because our bad habits or impulses are routines, impulses and actions are driven by momentary desires. And routines aren't driven by desires, but are actions we take simply because we've done them so many times. This is what makes bad habits so hard to break. They happen on autopilot, and many times we don't know that we're actually doing them until we've done them. And the later we get in the day, the more that decision fatigue sets in. How many of your bad purchases are made at nighttime? And we also tend to have routines and habits around how we make bad purchases, like lying in bed, Amazon scrolling. Even if you've been vigilant throughout the day, by 8 or 9 p.m., our guard is down. We're tired. And, we've had that decision fatigue. So if you were to instinctually pull out your phone at, let's say, 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, you might be able to catch that action while you're doing it. But by 9 p.m. on a Thursday, you might just not be thinking, and you're too tired to get into those thought processes and stop yourself. So here's what Dr. Korb has to say about this. When you eat a Snickers the first time, dopamine is released at the first bite. The next time at the wrapper, the next time when seeing it, and the time after that in the anticipation of walking into the grocery store. So with impulses, something that you do or sense triggers the anticipation of a specific pleasure or a specific pleasurable outcome. The problem is that the dopamine that is released in anticipation of pleasure actually motivates the actions that lead to the pleasure. Each step along the way gives you a little boost of dopamine that propels you to the next step. When we apply this to shopping, it's the anticipation of buying the thing or the anticipation of getting the thing, not the thing itself. I think this lingo of the dopamine hit is somewhat common in the no-buy space when we talk about it, but like, here's what actually is happening. And he also says that impulses leading you to do the things for immediate pleasure are usually not the things that are good for you in the long term. And these are the most insidious bad habits and routines. When you're stressed, you're more likely to act out of habit instead of intention. And habits are learned more deeply when we're stressed. So if you can manage to change your habits, even a little bit, even a micro amount when you're stressed, according to Dr. Korb anyways, that will have a more powerful effect on that habit overall. And when you come back to it when you're not stressed. Because when it comes to over shopping, it's typically not about the thing, but the way that the thing makes us feel. And that even relatedly, if we're talking kind of about emotions here, that I gotta have it, I need it, that true, oh my God, like in your head, in your heart, you're like convinced that you need it, that lust after that thing, I have felt it too. It can be so strong and it can be so hard to resist. And when you want it, you crave it, you need it, you're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It can feel so good to hit submit. You're like, yes, you got it what you wanted. You do your little happy dance and you're just like on cloud nine riding the high. Oh my God. I can admit that this is a hard habit to change. So how do you do it? How do you change it? Number one is to delay the purchase. The number one way I've been able to delay it is the not now, but later technique. If you've heard this before, you can go ahead and skip over it, but I'm going to talk about it just another time. When we say wait 2 weeks, wait a week, that can feel like an eternity. And if you're truly in the throes of wanting to buy something, because waiting 2 weeks feels like an eternity, you don't want to do it. So you're just going to buy it now because you want it so bad. And it can also feel like you're telling yourself no. Like 2 weeks, saying wait 2 weeks can feel like a no because you're not allowing yourself to buy it now. The not now, but later technique is most for those purchases where we feel like we're in the throes of lust and desire and I need it, want it now. So instead of saying, I'm going to wait 2 weeks, I'm going to wait whatever, or even just saying, no, you can't buy it, you're going to say, I'm going to wait a day. Or I'm going to wait 2 days. You're going to wait the maximum amount of time that you can in your mind wait without it feeling like a truly impossible amount. Sometimes for me, that's like 8 hours. Usually not that anymore. Usually it's like a day or two, or like I'll check back on Monday if it's a Friday. I can usually wait a couple of days. And then by the time that Monday rolls around, I'm usually in that a better headspace. Even if I want that thing, I can acknowledge, okay, I'm in the throes of lust. I'm in the throes of, wanting that reward, the dopamine hit. I can acknowledge that now. I still want it, but now I can wait an even longer amount of time, the full, let's say, week or 2 weeks at that point. So when we say not now, but later, we will reevaluate at that later date at 2 days. Like we will reevaluate then, but we're usually in a better headspace to be more realistic, more practical, where we could say no altogether, or we could wait the full amount that we actually wanted. What's helpful in this circumstance too is to think back to all of the times that either you waited and you realize your feelings have changed, or thinking about products that you felt so obsessive over, so gotta need it, gotta want it, gotta have it, and then thinking about how you feel about them now. There's stuff that I've purchased, say a year ago. Let's talk about some of my favorite things of last year that weren't replacements. So let's say something like headbands. I can admit that I was in some parts driven to buy things by that feeling, that dopamine hit, that gotta need it, gotta have it kind of feeling. And there is other stuff that just a week, 2 or 3 weeks ago that I was like, oh my God, lusting after it, and I don't feel that way anymore. All of us have had that experience with things, or most of us, with things that we have and haven't purchased. Thinking back, that alone now is usually what will do it. That will just allow me to wait the appropriate amount of time, whatever I deem appropriate, to be able to think about that thing and ask the kinds of questions that I would want to ask. the whole reason why we want to say delay is because we're not in the right frame of mind to think critically or consciously about that purchase. It doesn't mean that the purchase is inherently bad or that we can't or shouldn't buy it. It's that we are incapable of being critical and being honest with ourselves when we are in those throes of desire. And we need to be able to get to a point where we can think about that thing as objectively as possible and be as critical and ask our questions and be honest with ourselves. Lastly, if you are very seriously feeling those urges and like nothing is working, recalling your financial goals, I think, could be a last resort. I only, personal experience, I only do this in extreme cases because this can quickly turn into a shaming tactic, which I don't want for myself. And what I will do is I will ask myself, is this purchase worth sacrificing my goals for? Is this purchase worth sacrificing my financial future for? It is kind of an extreme question. I started asking myself this when I was during my no-buy because I found myself wanting to break it so often. And so it's like, yeah, it's only a $30 purchase, but then it's like, when I calculate all of the things I want, it's not $30 anymore, it's $742 worth of stuff. And $742 worth of stuff could be a couple of car payments, could be debt payment, could be, like all of your savings that you would normally save for a month. It could be a lot of things. It could be 2 months worth of groceries. It could be a month worth of groceries. Like it could be a lot of things. And when we think about our aesthetic, we can also come to see or believe or feel like every choice, every style choice, every aesthetic choice, when we think through that lens as being so heavily like representative of ourselves, like every style choice being a big choice. And all the style people out there want you to believe that. And in some ways it's true, but we can't have literally every small detail, every literal choice that we make ever about our aesthetic being somehow like representative of who we are. Not every choice has to be that big choice. And so then we can also feel like our wardrobes and our aesthetics, those choices are super big, super important, and something we need to take time, care, and attention. And we don't need to hyperfixate all of the time. Like we don't need to think of our scrunchies as somehow making some kind of statement about who you are. Sometimes we can just let our scrunchie be a scrunchie. Tattoos, kind of going back to the topic that we kind of started with today's video. It's kind of a lot. Tattoos are an interesting example because they are the most permanent, but also like one of the more expensive things. So they can be prohibitively expensive, but they, I think, could also be aesthetic choices that we're making without even realizing that we're making aesthetic choices.
Hello, Editing Shauna here. I was rambling on for like 8 minutes about something that I didn't even say how I wanted to say. So we're putting this over and hopefully I can be a little bit more concise with my words and more direct. So there's 2 things I want to talk about: rationalizing and then choices behind tattoos. So you can get tattoos for a lot of reasons. But some of my tattoos were made, or all of them were made with a consideration that wasn't really about aesthetic. It was about like something has meaning to me. Something has like emotionally registers to me, which is a reason why a lot of people get tattoos, or probably their first tattoo. And when you're thinking in that way, you can be wrapped up in the emotional implications or the meaning and the impact of them and not consider the aesthetic implications of your choice. When I got mine, I knew full well that yes, this would be on my body permanently. I recognize that. But what I failed to understand is ultimately the crux of this video. I, at 18, 19, 20, was incapable of conceptualizing my life at 30 or at 40 or at 50. Even now, I have no idea what the world is going to bring me in the next decade of my life. And I don't know who I will be, what I will become. And I have ideas of what my life might look like that might feel more real or more possible now than at 19 or 20. And 10 years from now, my body's still going to have the implications or the results of choices that I made at 19 or 20, which can be like a fun time capsule and like a fun way to revisit parts of your life, which I do really love. That doesn't mean that that's always the case, that revisiting those things are a good thing or a positive thing, or that the result of those choices are aesthetics that you still want or something that like you still want to remember or think about 10, 20 years later. I'm bringing this up again now after talking all about, our experiences with changing aesthetics and changing your mind and evolving and growing stylistically as people. I think in a lot of contexts, we fail to consider the permanence or the impermanence of our choices. And that same mindset and the same way of thinking about evolution and permanence is also factored into tattoos. So I feel like if we're bad at thinking in one context, it will filter over into other places of our lives.
Let's start with number one. Minimalism is quite a big subculture, and not only does it have a community, but it also has a philosophy and a practice that you do day in and day out. The day-to-day stuff and the bulk of what the community talks about online is stuff. Yes, minimalism does have a philosophy that there are creators who do talk about it. But even those creators and just the bulk of the community, they're talking about stuff all the time, specifically and most especially decluttering. No matter how you want to look at it, minimalism is stuff-centered. I do also want to say that just because you own less doesn't actually mean that you'll spend less time, money, and energy on stuff or thinking about stuff or buying stuff. I get where this idea comes from, but this doesn't actually mean that by decluttering that this will be your experience. What I've personally found is that the fewer things you own, the more important each purchase is, because you're more conscientious about what you bring in, you're more considered. And things often have a higher price tag because minimalism also often advocates for fewer, nicer things. Minimalism is also often, or minimalists are often intertwined with concepts like conscious consumerism, sustainability, and ethics. If every purchase becomes more important because you're making fewer and you're trying to be more considered, that means you can also be spending dozens of hours researching stuff before you buy it. There is nothing wrong with research, but I feel like this could be a bit of a false promise with minimalism. Minimalists, especially at the beginning, often spend so much time talking about decluttering. The people who I actually hear talk about decluttering the most are minimalists. And decluttering is just another stuff-focused activity. As well, minimalists often advocate a declutter-first approach. Decluttering being the first thing you do in becoming a minimalist. I would disagree with such approach because you haven't learned anything yet. Deciding to be a minimalist is a great first step, but what have you learned in order to purchase better or to purchase different? You feel like being a minimalist is important to you for a certain reason. You likely overconsume, buy too much stuff, maybe there's debt. You're just spending too much time and money on stuff. Or maybe you're tired of this cycle of buying and decluttering. Or maybe your home is so full of stuff, it's causing you stress and anxiety. How do you make sure that your life doesn't end up in that place again? Just simply decluttering is usually not enough in order to stop whatever habits you have that got you to where you were, because shopping is a habit. Decluttering is an enticing first step because it is a physical manifestation of how you're feeling inside and this new commitment that you've made. And your place, your mind, your life can be transformed, even if it's just for a while. But we can lose sight of the goal pretty quickly because we see our stuff around us changing, our physical environment changing, but we haven't actually done any of the internal work to make sure that we don't accumulate like we have done before. And with just how stuff-centered minimalism is, you're thinking about stuff all of the time. And decluttering in itself will not make you a minimalist, despite what the minimalists say. Minimalism is also a shopping habit, or has its own set of shopping habits. And in my opinion, the most successful minimalists are people who are not looking at stuff all of the time, who are not thinking about stuff all of the time, who are not putting in hours and hours and hours of researching. Number 2 is compassion. When it comes to changing your shopping habits, compassion is absolutely an overlooked ingredient, overlooked necessity, I would argue, because it is absolutely necessary. It's very likely that one of the reasons why you've avoided looking at your habits or like examining them truly with honesty is that you're afraid. You know things are bad. You know that they're not how they should be, but you are so afraid to see the extent of the damage, see the extent of like where things are. You know that you screwed up. You know you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Like, you already know that. This is where you need compassion. Because yes, there is this fear, but also like fear of what? Fear of change. Yes. But also, I think fear of judgment. You're afraid of confronting yourself and the choices that you've made. You're afraid of like those feelings of the guilt and the shame and the regret. But guess what? If you come with compassion to that moment, then there is no guilt or shame. Like, you're coming there. Just imagine your friend comes to you and they go, Shauna, or whatever your name is, and they say, Shauna, I've spent this amount of money, or I'm in debt, or I'm like this. I feel like crap. And they express to you as a friend, like the exact kinds of same things that like you're thinking. I'm a failure. I'm a piece of shit. I'm this. I'm that. I'll never do this. I'll never do that. Would you really judge your friend? Would you really tell your friend, yeah, you know what? You're kind of shitty. You're kind of bad with money. I don't think that you're a good person. Hell no. Why would you say that to yourself? In this moment, you need compassion more than anything, because flogging yourself, beating yourself up, that truly accomplishes nothing. It, in fact, makes the situation worse. You feel worse about yourself. You'll feel worse about the situation that you're in, and it could maybe even feel like that hole is insurmountable, that you can't actually climb out of it. I think it's this moment right here that prevents a lot of people from checking in, and what also like ultimately keeps people from checking in and then having their hands forced somewhere down the line where like they have to change because they truly can't afford to go on any longer. Their bank has called, or they're in collections, or your lights are being turned off. Something kind of more extreme has happened and your hand has been forced. Even if you've let it get to a point where your hand is forced, you can still come to yourself with compassion. It's not a case of you don't deserve it because you've made worse choices than you expected, or because your hand has been forced, you don't deserve compassion. No, that's probably even more necessary to come to yourself with compassion. And having compassion for ourselves is one of the best things that we can do, because it helps us see our choices with clarity and without judgment, which is so important. Because some of, like, when we're looking at our choices, I spent this amount of money. part of what feels like the choice are all of the feelings wrapped up in it and how you feel about it. It's not, okay, I spent $3,000, I don't have to pay back. It's like, oh my God, what did you do? You spent $3,000. You don't have the money. What the fuck? What's going to go on? Like, I can't afford this. I'm going to go into debt. I'm going to do this. And then it just becomes this like big dramatic scene instead of, I spent $3,000. I'm not saying don't care, but we don't have to be wrapped up in our judgment. Coming with compassion is a bit like coming with self-awareness and coming with ownership. Ooh, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed the video. This was so fun. And all of the videos are linked in the description. Thanks for hanging out with me. And I hope to see you again around here soon. Bye.